Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. And as usual now, finally, after a summer's hiatus, I'm joined in the cockpit by co-pilot Awesome. You know him as Austin Ward. Awesome Ward, welcome to the Tim May Podcast.
It is always my pleasure to be on this show, the greatest Ohio State and college football podcast that I'm aware of.
Thank you. I haven't gotten an award yet, but I'm looking forward to receiving it, perhaps at a nice dinner or luncheon. But I digress. I like how I get into like a monotone when I'm introducing you too. That's one of my favorite parts. I don't know why that happens. It's just all natural. But, this is the season is underway. Ohio State has a game under its belt, a twice come from behind win at Minnesota, winning comfortably, finally 45-31. I'm not sure if things were ever comfortable in the light rain and everything else that existed there that night. You were there, of course, but now headed into this early season showdown with Oregon, and Oregon coming off a one touchdown win, or at least a narrow victory over Fresno State, also coming from behind. I'm trying to remember if they ever trailed in that game or not, to be honest with you. They took a lead, whatever, but it was a heck of a close game for Oregon. And I've got a fellow coming on we're going to talk in depth about Oregon, Jared Denney. He's part of that on3.com family. As I told him, I said, you're kind of like a nephew or a cousin of mine based on that. But the On3 network is quite expansive, right? Right. Awesome. And we're going to take advantage of it on this podcast.
Absolutely, we will. And it's still growing. A lot more in the works that we can't announce at this point, but the Oregon folks will be out in full force on Saturday. Ivan Maisel is going to be in the building, also representing On3. So a lot of firepower, a lot of brands under that umbrella that are going to be providing coverage of one of the biggest non-conference games of the season on Saturday in the Horseshoe. Yeah,
not just brands, but basically big-time icons. Ivan Maisel is an icon when it comes to coverage of college football especially, but a longtime friend of mine. Looking forward to seeing him again. But, of course, I digress. Real quickly, before I get to my conversation with Jared Denney, that's Jarrid, by the way, an interesting spelling. I didn't even get into that with him. But the bottom line is, what is the one thing Ohio State's got to get straightened out? And we'll discuss it more in depth when we come back from my conversation with Jared. But what's that one thing that's glaring in your mind that Ohio State's got to get straightened out between the time we're recording this podcast and the showdown Saturday, September 11 in the shoe?
Yeah, I think Ohio State needs to nail down who it wants to play at linebacker, and that just seems to be a position to me that is a little bit like linebacker, where the more you play it, the more comfortable you get, the more in the flow, making reads, making the tackles, playing physically you're going to be. Ohio State tried a lot of different guys at linebacker. They missed, some tackles I think that they would like to have back, and that extended some Minnesota drives and then kept that high-powered Ohio State offense on the sideline more than, of course, it wanted to be. So Taraja Mitchell, I thought he played that game that we've been looking forward to for a long time. He's one of them. And then they worked through 3, 4, 5 other guys at linebacker. I think the makings of a really good unit are there, but against a team, like Oregon that may have a little bit more explosiveness than Minnesota did, which that offensive line from Minnesota is really good. We got to give them credit.
Yes.
And Mo Ibrahim is a fantastic running back. They created some things that gave Ohio State a challenge. So it's not solely an issue just for Ohio State. The opponent they played is good, but if you're talking about moving forward, winning a huge non-conference game, winning a national championship down the road, Ohio State will have to tackle better.
Yeah, and it always helps the other team when you don't line up right. So we'll talk about a few of those instances too, which got to get straightened. There were a lot of first game, I'm not calling it rust. I mean, it was like they just opened the box and we're working with new pieces for this little model airplane they're building on the defensive side. And I thought there were a few slip-ups all across the board, from calls that were made to the way guys, basic stuff, the way guys lined up, but that goes back to, what are the signals you're getting, et cetera? Why were people confused a few times? We'll get into that in a few moments. But first, let's go to my conversation with Jared Denney, beat writer for On3.com for the Oregon football program. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, I've reached out way out west to welcome in my guest this week, Jared Denney. Jared Denney, welcome to the Tim May Podcast.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on. How is everything?
Everything's pretty good, man. The weather has turned more fall-like than the sweltering sweat box it was most of August. I don't know what it's like for you guys. You guys have been through similar kind of situations, right, out there?
Yeah, and we've got kind of the wildfire deal going on out here, so it's just kind of one big layer of smoke
Yeah,
down in Eugene right now.
I like how you said kind of the wildfire thing going like that. Yeah, ho hum. But that's been crazy out there, and I know you guys had some bad ones around that Eugene area for a while. At one point. But I just wanted to get into it, ladies and gentlemen. As I told you before, I got to Jared here. He covers the Oregon Ducks for On3.com, and part of the Lettermen is part of that On3.com family. I guess we're sort of cousins in a way, right, Jared?
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, the way we look here, I look more like your older uncle, and you're my little nephew. But I digress, man. Hey, you've covered a lot of things, before you got into covering Oregon football. Give people a little bit of a background on you so they can understand why I turned to you for some expertise in this situation.
Yeah, so I got my start covering Oregon football back as a student journalist in 2000, kind of 15, 16, 17 range at the U of O. And for anybody who followed Oregon at that time, it was the end of the Mark Helfrich era, which ended in a disaster. And it was sort of more of a crime beat that year than it was a football beat with what was going on with the football program.
Crazy.
Yeah, and from there, I had back-to-back internships with MLB.com and worked as a beat writer covering the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Minnesota Twins. So I made it out east a little bit and got close to you guys. Didn't quite get out there, but yeah, which is awesome. It was a great experience. I love baseball, and that's always kind of been a dream of mine to cover a full baseball season. And it also sort of makes a college football season feel a lot less daunting when you're going kind of 162 games. But yeah, and then ended up covering Oregon State football the last couple of years, and then just recently moved back home to Eugene, and I'm covering the Ducks again, and I couldn't be more excited.
Man, you must have a minivan with all kinds of stuff stuck in, including a little bed, right? I mean, is that where you sleep most of the time?
Yeah, just keep it on the road at all times.
There you go, man. On the road again, ladies and gentlemen, with Jared Denney. Well, let's get right to it. Obviously, Oregon escaped its opener with Fresno. Is it Fresno now or Fresno State still? What did you call it?
Yeah, Fresno State.
Yeah, I know, man. They've played Ohio State a couple times back in the day, but it's really, I'm not giving Oregon any excuse right here, but it's really difficult when you play a team that has played a game before in an opener where you've got a first-year starting quarterback and some other things you're trying to get squared away, maybe defensively, et cetera. But the funny thing is, Oregon was fast out of the gate and then slowed up, right, and let Fresno kind of make a game of it. But just what was your take about the opener in a nutshell? I guess from your vantage point.
I think there's a lot to be mildly concerned about. I also don't think I'm kind of sounding the alarm as urgently as a lot of people in Eugene are. I think Fresno State's a better ball club than I think a lot of Oregon fans want to give them credit for. That's a good program with a good coaching staff that's got them on the rise. They have a great, experienced, talented defensive line that sort of just gave Oregon fits, and maybe that'll be the case all season long. The jury's still out on that offensive line if it's going to be good enough to kind of take the Ducks where they want to go. But I mean, you have to give some credit to Fresno State for just doing some things really well as well. And I think it was a whole different ballgame once Kayvon Thibodeau went down with an ankle injury. And for the first quarter and a half there, you saw him kind of, he had Jake Haener, Fresno State's quarterback, running for his life. And it looked like Haener wasn't even going to make it through the game with some of the hits that Thibodeau laid on him. And then a quarter and a half later, he's out, and Oregon kind of looks like a whole different ball club, which is to be expected when you lose one of the 2, 3, 4 best players in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. As we record this, it's early in the week, obviously, before Ohio State hosts Oregon on Saturday at noon Ohio State time, 9 a.m. Oregon time. But, of course, they started their game this past week with Fresno State at 11 a.m., so they're used to getting up early. But, what's just your take on Kayvon Thibodeau and the defensive end, the talented defensive end sophomore? What's your take on him as far as his possible availability on Saturday versus Ohio State?
Yeah, you get the feeling from Mario Cristobal yesterday that it's not as serious as it could have been in terms of, and I mean, I don't know if I feel comfortable saying that it's not going to keep him out of Ohio State, but the fact that he went to the locker room, came back, and then, I shouldn't say he went to the locker room, he went to the medical tent, got taped up, came back, played a couple drives, and then ultimately came out of the locker room after halftime in street clothes. And I think that's just a precaution to protect your superstar player in a game that they probably thought they could get by without him. And it was closer than anybody would have liked, but job well done on their part. I think you have to protect him at all costs and make sure that he's going to be ready to play 80 snaps at Ohio State.
Yeah, walking boot, man, covers quite the gamut. I mean, as you probably watched some of the Ohio State game the other night, and Mohammed Ibrahim, Minnesota's incredibly talented running back. He was also in a walking boot at the end of the game, but there was a fear that basically he has an Achilles injury, which is not exactly an ankle sprain, if you follow my drift.
Right.
And I'm curious on Thibodeau, whether it's an ankle or a high ankle sprain and ankle sprain are two different animals, but you just kind of pick up what you can anymore on injury reports. Isn't that right, Jared?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like every major program in the country, Mario Cristobal is not going to reveal a lot in terms of injuries. And I imagine KT is going to be at the top of the depth chart that gets released this week, and everything will be full go. And hopefully we'll get some word closer to the end of the week on what his status is. But if I had to guess, he's going to do whatever he has to do to play this game. A, because it's Oregon's most significant game of the season, and B, because it would be really great tape for him as he's evaluated.
Yeah, exactly. And Ohio State's offensive line's coming off a real high. I mean, the way they kind of, they've got just a mountain. I call them the blocking hills, which is a key, kind of an homage to the Hocking Hills of Ohio, Southeast Ohio. But the way they played on Saturday night as that game progressed at Minnesota was, I think, obvious to everybody how good that line can be down the road. They basically got 4 tackles starting in the 4 outside spots, flanking the center, and have moved guys around to make room for example, a guy like DeJuan Jones, 6'9", 370 pounds, who played pretty well the other night. And his first, he started before, but this is his first start as a true starter, if you follow my drift there. And it's hard to follow my drift sometimes. I'm kind of like a wildfire. I go from here to there. But the bottom line is, everybody's looking forward to that matchup. How do they handle Kayvon Thibodeau, projected down the road possibly being a number 1 draft pick? We'll see how that goes. But he is that talented, isn't he?
He's incredible. And the first interview I sort of had with him this year at Oregon's Media Day, one thing that stood out to me was I sort of asked him what a successful season looks like for him this year. He just said one word, is perfection. Like, he expects to be absolutely perfect this year. And he can kind of contextualize that by saying he wants to play 80 snaps a game. That's something he didn't do last year. He needs to be in the kind of 15 to 20 sack range, which I know it's hard to put tangible numbers on a season, especially when you have injuries like that pop up. But this is a guy who's absolutely determined to get every ounce that he can out of this season. And I think that the Ducks are going to do whatever they can to make sure that happens.
Yeah. The Ducks got, by the way, I was going, when you said Cristobal should not be mistaken for injury crystal ball, right? So I want to get that line out of there. But that was pretty good on my part. You agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Neither should Ryan Day be seen as the daylight on injuries either. But that was even worse of a pun. But they, the Ducks got kind of banged up even before and during that game. I mean, Drew Mathis, he looks like he may be out like right now. What's just your take on him?
I think he's out certainly for Ohio State and probably well beyond. While Mario Cristobal doesn't usually tip his hand with a lot of injuries, one of his tells is if he says that somebody's banged up pretty good, which he did yesterday. He said that about Patrick Herbert, Oregon's talented tight end at the start of the year.
Yeah.
That's sort of the giveaway that, hey, this is going to be a few weeks at least. And it sucks because Drew Mathis is kind of one of the feel-good stories of the program. Not a super highly recruited guy. I mean, a good prospect, but not one of these 4 or 5 star guys that Oregon is coming in now, but somebody who's just worked his butt off to get to the top of the depth chart and is really, really respected in that locker room. So it's just a bummer to see him go down like that, and you hope for a speedy recovery.
Yeah, I guess Oregon now staying with the pun mobile. Oregon now just has to go with the flow, right? Justin Flow. You like that one now, don't you? That was pretty good.
I don't know where you're getting all these puns.
They just come to me, man, like rain from heaven. But talented, former 5-star linebacker. You were talking about him. You wrote about him in your 5 observations from the game, 5 takeaways from that game the other night. And he did. I mean, if you watch the video, he was quite assertive in some cases, maybe over assertive, and got a little bit away with it. But 14 tackles. kind of taking up the slack there in the second half, especially. He did come to play, right?
He was incredible yesterday, and he's, I think, the one player who Oregon fans were probably most excited to watch yesterday because he's the second highest ranked recruit in Oregon's history behind Kayvon Thibodeau, and now you have them both on the field at the same time. Yeah. He had a pretty gnarly knee injury that wiped out his true freshman season and worked like crazy to make it back. And I think there were some questions when him and Mathis were kind of an either or situation at the top of the depth chart, how kind of ready and healthy he was. And he steps in and makes 14 tackles and basically played every snap of the second half. And talking to Cristobal afterwards, Justin Fuller was a little dinged up too. He wasn't 100% healthy going into this game, and he played through it. And it's just kind of one of those old school do it all high octane linebackers that you don't see so much anymore. And I think one of the funnest things with him is just watching the energy that this kid plays with, and kind of that contagious, infectious, just really, really exciting brand of play. You can tell he just loves being out there, and he loves being an Oregon Duck. Yeah, he flies around. I mean, bottom line is too, this is what I like about a player. Somebody make a play. Somebody make a play. He makes a play. That strip there, midway late in the fourth quarter, which really changed the game, right? I mean, I'm trying to remember the exact time frame, but that was somebody coming up, stepping up, and then of course Anthony Brown with a nice pass to Johnny Johnson III, and then he follows up with that little, I guess it was a zone read option keeper to the right side for the go-ahead touchdown. Anthony Brown, we're talking about the quarterback. He had a great start and then a fall off, and then he stepped back up when they needed it most and delivered a play. So it's kind of a weird take from that, because obviously everybody has room to improve, but I would think the Ducks are feeling pretty good about the way the game ended in the sense of taking control when they needed to. Yeah, I agree. And that's sort of one of the things I wrote a bit longer on yesterday, was that sort of Anthony Brown wasn't, of course, he had an up and down day. That's pretty apparent if you look at his stat line. If you watch the tape, they're talking to him afterwards. There's a lot of throws that he would have liked to have had back and will probably ideally make in the future. But the Ducks needed a big play yesterday, and on 4th and 2, he runs a perfectly executed option and does what they need to do. And you look around the Pac-12 North yesterday, where the Ducks were the only team to end up with a win. There were a lot of schools that probably would have been happy to have somebody like Anthony Brown leading them through a situation like that. And that's not to say is the answer. I think I don't know that yet. I don't know if there's a lot of people who know what Oregon's quarterback situation is going to look like by the end of the year. I think we need a larger sample size with Anthony Brown in that offense. And I think that the offensive line was pretty bad yesterday, to be fair to him. And I think that's something they're definitely going to have to shore up quickly. So there aren't a lot of nuanced, balanced takes about Anthony Brown floating around out there at the moment. Yeah. There's a lot of cries for to get Ty Thompson, the really talented true freshman, in there, but I think that's not happening anytime soon. If it was going to, you would have seen it happen yesterday, and they're certainly not going to throw Ty in there in Columbus on a whim. So it's Anthony Brown for better or worse right now, and I think that he and Oregon are both capable of playing a lot better than what folks saw yesterday. Yeah, I mean, is Clemson going to step away from Ugalele, after a really tough night? Right. When the offensive line couldn't block Georgia, but it's always the quarterback's fault. You follow my drift. I mean, even Ohio State fans, quite a few on social media were calling for the removal of CJ Stroud after only a quarter and a half as a first-time ever starter for the Buckeyes, and put a pure freshman in there in Kyle McCord. That's what, a lot of fans wanted. And of course, all CJ Stroud did was step up and deliver the most efficient, probably second half of quarterbacking in Ohio State history, going 5 out of 8 for 230 yards and 4 touchdowns. Right. Of course, it helps when you got Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson playing for you to throw it to. But the bottom line is, folks, give these guys a little bit of time to just get their shoes tied, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there are some fair questions surrounding Anthony Brown, sort of his overall arm talent and how kind of far he progresses through the route tree sometimes. But the guy's a really, really talented playmaker who can do it through the air, he can do it with his feet. But again, I think Fresno State's a better front seven than people give it credit for yesterday. And this is something you and I were talking about before we started recording, but Fresno State had played a game a week earlier and Oregon hadn't. And who knows how much that actually plays into things, but it looked at times like Oregon just wasn't quite physically there on offense yesterday. And I think that's something where you just have to go out there and start hitting it, get a game under your belt and see how things go.
Yeah. As I always put it, no matter who you're playing, the great programs are really good programs like Ohio State. They talk about iron sharpens iron, during practices and things like that. But baby, when you go into an opener, a conference opener like Ohio State did at Minnesota, that's steel versus steel. They've got their best guys out there going against you. And, and it does. I mean, so it's a rude awakening for guys who haven't played, a lot of guys hadn't even played yet, in big time games, and the speed of the game, the exhaustion standpoint of hyperventilating and stuff that steps in for anybody in those kind of situations, and as Ryan Day said, all they wanted out of that game was a W, and they got it, and they ended up with a double digit W. But it's really funny as you look at these two teams, what Ohio State did really well in that game seems to suit them on where Oregon had some shortcomings. The offensive line having trouble against Fresno's basically veteran front, and I thought Ohio State's offensive line for the most part played great. And then throwing the ball, I mean, it looked like if you gave Haener some time, there were some guys open, so to speak. And so we'll see where that goes. I mean, Ohio State, of course, did not set the world on fire as a defensive secondary the other night, or defense. And you watch some of that game. Do you see parts of Oregon that can take advantage of that if Anthony Brown gets some time and his arm does step up a little bit?
I think there definitely are parts that play well into that. I think the play calling yesterday didn't necessarily lend into that. And again, it's week one and you're sort of trying to get through it without showing your entire playbook. And I'm sure that there was a little bit of that with Oregon's offensive coordinator, Joe Moorhead, yesterday, but it seemed like they were kind of hell-bent on running into a packed box and making it work, which has been one of the criticisms of Cristobal in his time here, is that he really wants to be a hard-nosed ground and pound sort of team, and it doesn't always necessarily play into the personnel that he has. And I think he has that type of player now. He has a really big, physical, powerful offensive line, and there's times where it's still not working. So that's sort of the knock on him at this point, and something that's going to have to be answered this year. But I'm sort of dancing around your question a little bit. But,
no, that's good. Yeah. I like guys who dance. Go ahead.
In reference to Ohio State secondary, Oregon has a lot of talent in its receiver corps. They have 3, 4, 5 really good tight ends that I don't think anybody would be unhappy to see on the field this season. That they have a ton of weapons, and they just didn't really do much to take advantage of all of them yesterday. And maybe that's a little bit situational, a little bit a victim of circumstance, but I'll be interested to see just how much they open up the playbook against Ohio State, because like you said, there were times against Minnesota where, I mean, it's not disastrous, but it looked like if you were playing a good kind of balanced passing attack, there are things that can be exploited that I think Oregon will probably look to exploit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why they pay those guys. That's why those assistant coaches and head coaches get so much damn money now, Jared. Don't you wish that filtered down to the media?
I should be going to you, man.
Yeah, let's name, image, and likeness, man. Let's take advantage of it. But hey, real quick, I just want to get into, you talked about the Pac-12 had a tough day. The division Oregon's in had a tough day on Saturday. Are you fired up about this alliance, man? What's this alliance going to do for college football?
I'm excited to find out more about it so I can know if I should be excited about it. There's just nothing on it so far, and these game contracts run a decade in advance, and it just sounds like nothing's budging until then. Maybe something changes, but I mean it's great just for the breaking up the SEC of it all. But I don't think we're going to know a whole lot for another 12 to 24 months. So I'm trying to temper expectations on what it actually means.
Don't you think it means that if the SEC puts forth, hey, let's have 110 players on scholarship, that they're going to have a voting block that says, no, let's don't do that. I mean, it's, I'm trying to get past, scheduling lasts, but like you said, in football schedules, their game scheduled 10 years from now in a lot of places. And, how are you going to change up all that? And, as they said, they're going to honor all those contracts, but heck, I've seen teams drop games, 2-3 years before, sometimes a year before, because they just don't want to play that game or whatever the reason is. So yeah, I'm as curious as you are about the alliance. It's like the Confederacy, whatever you want to call it, the Confederation against the Death Star, which is the SEC. But I digress. These teams didn't play last year most everybody, including myself, I was looking forward to taking my first trip ever to Eugene. I've been to Washington 3 or 4 times. Bottom line is, they at least salvaged this game out of this contract. But, how big a game is this for Oregon in a nutshell? I know that's kind of being tried a little bit, but, is this a measuring stick for Mario Cristobal? How are people looking at it from out there?
I think it's a huge measuring stick, and I think it's as big of a game as they've had since LSU some 9-10 years ago. I think my math might be off a little bit there, but I mean, maybe Auburn in 2019 I don't think it was this big of a deal. But sort of going back to what you said, this is a measuring stick for Mario Cristobal. These are the programs that he expects Oregon to be competing with, and the way they've recruited, they should be competing with them. I think that it's going to be very telling this week on sort of the state of the program. And I know that the lines just came out and it's not exactly favorable for Oregon.
No.
But I think that I don't actually have a bold prediction ready for you as to what Oregon's going to go out and do. But I think they're certainly going to be better than what they were yesterday. And for that to happen, maybe Kayvon Thibodeau does have to be fully healthy, and I guess that's a little bit left up in the air, but there are some things that Oregon did do really well, especially on the defensive side of things yesterday, that I think leads me to believe that they're going to be all right. I don't know if they escape with a win, but it's not going to be the disaster that a lot of people on Twitter are sort of predicting it to be already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not looking for a prediction for you, early in the week. I'm just interested, like you just pointed out, these are the games why you recruit a Kayvon Thibodeau. They make a difference in games like these, and that's why it was interesting to watch Anthony Brown kind of step up when it was needed. Like I said, against Fresno State, and like Brandon Dorlus, had a huge play in that game also. Kind of stepping up for, not necessarily for Kayvon Thibodeau, but for that front. They got to Hainer, the Fresno State quarterback, when they needed to make a play and kind of flip that game a little bit. So it is interesting. I just always wonder. You saw Ohio State versus Oregon in the 2009 season, the Rose Bowl that followed 2010, and of course everybody remembers the 2014 the first college football playoff national championship game. 2000 was played in 2015 in Dallas, but 2014 season, and I'm just wondering if there's like I don't know if Ohio State's kind of stuck in Oregon fans' craw about being right there. Those would have been 2 major victories, obviously for that program. It didn't get done. And do you sense there is a hangover from those, especially that last game?
There sort of is. And I just am remembering back to the night of that Ohio State Oregon game, and just sort of, it was as melancholy as I've ever seen Eugene. I was still a student at that point. You go down to campus and 13th Avenue, where kind of all the campus bars are at. It was just depressing. It's not like there were couches on fires or anybody freaking out or doing kind of the normal like angry post game thing. Like people were just sad and bummed, and it sort of felt like Oregon had fallen flat on its face when it had kind of the biggest chance of program history. So I think there is sort of still that stigma towards Ohio State, and I think that this team has, to be honest, a really good chance right now to erase that and sort of establish itself as a program that's ready to play with the big boys. And you mentioned it, the Pac-12 North looked absolutely horrendous yesterday. It was a terrible day for the conference. Washington's a top 20 team. They lost to Montana. Like, it's not the Pac-12, quite frankly, sort of needs Oregon to put on a good show next weekend.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. It will be a little bit of a referendum for the Pac-12, especially Pac-12 North, right? I mean, it's like, you hate to say that that's the way things are, but I mean, you watch Clemson, Georgia. That was a huge game, man, early in the season. Now Clemson pretty much doesn't play anybody, so, they still say all their goals are in front of them, because of course they do. Dabo Swinney would say that, but an early season loss just sets the tone still in this four-team playoff era. And I'm just curious from your standpoint, what is the perception right now from the West Coast side of things on where the power does lie in major college football? I mean, just give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that the West Coast can kind of be a blind spot every once in a while, because you get so tunnel visioned into the Pac-12 after dark thing. And for the people who don't necessarily see the super early kicks, I think that you guys, Ohio State, are obviously one of the more well-respected programs out here. But I grew up with a bunch of Ohio State fans who have never probably gone east of the Rockies, but have just been obsessed with the Buckeyes since they were kids. Like, it's a national brand. And you look at the Clemsons, the Alabamas, I think that definitely reverberates out here. And it hurts that USC has been kind of a sleeping giant for a few years now. The Pac-12 needs them to be good and be recruiting well and be playing in big games on a year-to-year basis. And until that happens, I think there's going to be sort of an image issue with the Pac-12. And Oregon does a fine job of closing that gap, but it would be really, really helpful if there were two prolific, kind of top 10, top 5, contending programs out here on a consistent basis. And there's just not at the moment. And it's a huge issue.
Yeah, it is funny because Oregon carried the weight. They were the pack mule of the Pac-12, pardon that pun, for a while there, but you like you said, you need these other guys to reassert themselves, well, not the least of whom is USC, just a traditional big time program. Hey, well, last thing, what is your take on the Pac-12 this year as you sit here? I mean, no matter what happens on Saturday in Ohio Stadium, game time at 12 noon Eastern Daylight Time, 9 a.m. Oregon time. Of course, that game this past week with Fresno State started at 11 a.m. your local time, right? So, was that done, you think, to kind of help Oregon prepare for the jet lag? What's your take, man?
No, I think that's a good way to look at it, and I think that now that Larry Scott is finally out of office in the Pac-12, there's a lot of reshaping around not just cramming all your kind of prominent games after dark and making sure that East Coast viewers get a chance to view your product. And I think I've said this a few times already, the Pac-12 has had a terrible branding issue the last few years, and a lot of it falls on Larry Scott just making some, quite frankly, unconceivable head-scratching decisions that have led to not just Oregon, but I mean, there's been good teams. Arizona State was one of the better teams in the conference last year. I don't remember watching them play a game before dark at all last season. It's just really poor in my opinion. And I think that's something that you're going to see going forward is the Pac-12 in general, just making more of the opportunities it has to turn itself into a national brand and make sure that it's not just that other conference out there on the left side of the country that's like, oh yeah, like maybe Oregon's good, but we don't really know anything about them. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And it is tough, man. The time difference is what it is, and so, I mean, I've always admired Oregon, the way they got their act together and came up, they've had pretty good coaches, for the most part, setting it along, not the least of whom was Chip Kelly, who really reasserted them on the map, and of course, Phil Knight's always helped, right?
Yeah, but Chip, as you say, they looked dialed in yesterday.
They finally got a quarterback and that they feel comfortable with, and a running back from Michigan. That just tells you what's going on at Michigan. They got so many good players. Those guys are leaving. No, I'm just messing with you. Hey, will be interesting to see if Washington loses to 2 teams in a row that the name starts with an M, right? I mean, this is a major weekend for Washington football, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine covering that beat today?
I was scrolling through some of the coverage of it, and it looked like an absolute dumpster fire. I can't. I mean, there's a lot of sort of Schadenfreude going on in our comment section right now of people who are really excited to see Washington fail. And I suppose as a Duck fan, like that, it's obviously fun to a certain extent, but also like they were supposed to be a top 20 team. They were supposed to be a game that was circled on Oregon's calendar for that. This is a chance for us to showcase ourselves against a really quality program, and they fell flat on their face against Montana and are probably going to be looking at some coaching staff changes at some point throughout the year. And it's enjoyable for Duck fans to see your direct rival play terribly in their opener, but I think it hurts the conference, and quite frankly, it's a really bad look. Yeah, exactly. Hey, I wanted to ask you real quick. You're coming on Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. You're coming to Ohio State, right? Yes, sir. Have you ever been to Ohio Stadium? I have not. What have you heard that intrigues you about Ohio Stadium or about the atmosphere in an Ohio State game that you're interested in? And it looks like they're going to have a packed house, unless the Delta variant really goes crazy. But what are you most interested in? Because, at heart, we sports writers are fans, not necessarily of the teams you cover, but of sports and stuff. But what are you most curious about Ohio Stadium and Ohio State? I'm curious to see an actual giant packed historic college football stadium, because while Autzen, I think, is a terrific venue, one of the funnest places in the country to watch a college football game, it's a lot smaller, kind of attendance wise than any of the major stadiums that it sort of is lumped in with reputation wise. So I'm looking forward to just sort of being in an atmosphere that has that same energy that Autzen has, but is damn near twice as big. It's going to be incredible.
It basically is almost twice as big. You're exactly right. I was like the game the other night at a really nice stadium that Minnesota has built there, Huntington Bank Stadium. It's basically half the size of Ohio Stadium, which is crazy, but at least it's a horseshoe. Hey, one last thing. Who are you most curious to watch live on the Ohio State side of things? I mean, who's a player that you definitely are curious to just see perform live?
This is going to sound like a cop-out, but it's sort of the reason that you asked me the same sort of questions about Anthony Brown. I want to see CJ Stroud live and sort of see how dynamic he is, and see if some of the kind of nits that people have had to pick after his first performance are really as apparent as they've been hyped up to be. And maybe my eyes wander a little more to quarterbacks every once in a while than they should, but I think he's a fascinating player to follow, and somebody who, like you said, he played incredible in the second half the other night. He's just getting roasted alive on Twitter, and I can't understand it. So I really want to see how he handles what I think is a pretty darn good Oregon pass rush. That even if Thibodeau's out or limited, Brandon Dorlus was incredible yesterday. Justin Flo, game-winning play on defense, and somebody who's definitely going to rise to the occasion. So I want to see Stroud against what I believe is a legitimate top 5 front 7.
Yeah. And the other thing, I mean, it's, CJ Stroud was the Elite 11 MVP 2 years ago. He's the first starting quarterback ever from Rancho Cucamonga, California. I wanted to ask this other thing that just came to me. Any sour grapes out there with Oregon fans that JT Tuimoloau picked Ohio State finally in the final analysis? Because obviously, I mean, he played extensively the other night at Minnesota as a freshman. He's only been on campus for 2 months, and I know I'm not sure how legitimate hopes were, but there were hopes that he would pick Oregon. But that's what a small world it is anymore. Is all these fan bases know all these other guys, right?
Yeah, and there were less sour grapes when he committed than I definitely thought there would be. It was a lot less of a volatile reaction. I think that's maybe because, and I mean, you guys did such a good job covering his recruiting, and it became pretty apparent that Ohio State was sort of the favorite. But I mean, obviously, Oregon would have killed to have a guy like that, and it would have been terrific. But I think the fact that Oregon fans are in a position where they can be disappointed that they're not getting a guy like that, whereas 10, 20 years ago, you're feeling lucky to be in the top 20 of a player like that. Like
exactly.
It's a whole different world of football in Eugene right now than it was even a decade and a half ago.
Yeah, exactly. And his coach in high school was a player at University of Washington. He got a little bit of grief from his former teammates and stuff, he told me. But bottom line is Ohio State's got Emeka Egbuka, kid from right there in the Seattle area, a wide receiver who they really like. Didn't get to catch a pass or anything the other night, but they really like him. And then JT Tuimoloau, boy, how much could Washington use those guys right now, right? In this Montana hangover.
Right. And the fact that, Ohio State's going into the Northwest where there's not necessarily, it's a little better in Washington, in the state of Washington, than it is in Oregon, but there's not a ton of 4 and 5 star talents coming out of here every year. So when you let one of them sort of out of your own backyard, it's a really bad indictment. It's happened to Oregon a few times. There's been a few 4 or 5 star guys who have headed elsewhere, but I think Mario Cristobal's done a really good job of putting up a fence in Oregon and making sure that the players who should be playing at Oregon are playing at Oregon. And the fact that Washington hasn't been capable of doing that in the Jimmy Lake era, I think is pretty damning.
Yeah, pretty damning is the right word. And we're not talking about a river. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Jared Denney, thanks for joining the Tim May podcast, man. I hope you had a good time. I did. And it's good to welcome in, like I said, a second cousin from the on3.com family.
Absolutely. I look forward to meeting y'all next weekend or end of this week.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jared Denney. Yeah, I appreciate Jared Denney coming on the Tim May podcast, part of that on3.com family. He does a pretty good job. Don't you agree? Pretty good. Does a good job. Don't you agree? Awesome.
Great job. That's why they acquired him.
God, I mean, I'm so used to people asking me on radio shows, everything to give grades, on the Buckeyes and stuff. And I don't know if PG pretty good is a grade or good, we'll see. Hey, real quickly before we get into it, Oregon, exposed itself a little bit in that game. I mean, losing Kayvon Thibodeau, their preseason All-American defensive end who went out, was creating havoc until he went out with an ankle sprain, came back in and then had to leave again and left spent the second half on the sidelines in his basically his street clothes with a boot on his ankle or his legs, not his on his ankle. But the bottom line is his availability for this week is still up in the air as we conduct this podcast. But it was clear they lost a spark when he left the game, right?
Yeah, he's one of the few players that you look at on that Oregon roster, or I do. So, well, that guy could play at Ohio State. And that's the highest compliment really you can pay to anyone in the country when you look at the recruiting rankings and the production and everything that's going on. With if you could play at Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia, Clemson, all right, then you've got to be part of the plans for somebody that's going to try and crash the college football playoff party.
Yeah.
Oregon, from my estimation, from what we've seen even in years past and then even over the weekend, they're still a little bit short on that. If you're trying to win in the trenches, which you still have to in college football, to match that physicality of what Ohio State can provide, he's one of the few that I could see who could really do that. Now, we'll see on Saturday if they can elevate their game, but I think just walking off the bus, he's the one that you draw your attention to, and there aren't a lot of other guys on that Oregon roster that I saw that's like, all right, well, they can maybe go toe-to-toe with Ohio State. I think back to the same thing when we saw them in 2014 against Ohio State in these two programs, the national title game. Even when Oregon was at the peak of their powers, if you want to put it that way, there was still a noted physical difference between those two programs when they got on the field. And if you take him out of the mix for the Ducks on Saturday, I think that'd be a major problem. Yeah.
A guy who really stepped up for them, though, was a former 5-star recruit, Justin Flo, got injured last year during that abbreviated season. But linebacker, he made some plays of what led them in tackles in that game against Fresno State. So, keep your eye on him. But like you said, across the board, just observationally, I agree with everything, with most of everything you just said. They just happened to make some plays at the end of the game to really preserve it. And bottom line is Anthony Brown. I think the jury's still out on him as their quarterback. Oregon's supposed to have the beefiest, maybe most physical offensive line it's ever had. As you're talking about going back to 2014, going back to 2009 when Ohio State played them in the Rose Bowl. That seemed to be the big difference between those two teams, was the size of the offensive and defensive lines in comparison. Now, Oregon's got maybe its largest offensive line in history, but had a lot of trouble protecting Anthony Brown against a good, but not on the same level, I don't think, front four from Fresno State as Ohio State's going to throw at them. And that could be a real difference in this game. Agreed?
Yeah, and I think that to go back to our previous conversation, Tim, Minnesota's offensive line was really good. And Ohio State's front seven that we were hoping to find out a lot more about them, they almost played even in that regard. They made the one huge critical flash play from Zach Harrison, got the touchdown to the Haskell Garrett, but there wasn't a ton of pressure. They had to play a lot against the rush. I think that maybe also added to some of the different sub packages and the personnel that was used throughout that game as it went along. But I think that was a good early test for Ohio State, because Minnesota, man, Tim, I'm pretty curious what would have happened if Ibrahim had stayed healthy all year. That was a team that I thought had the pieces maybe to contend in the West. Maybe they still will, as long as that offensive line is healthy. And then when they're not playing Ohio State on a weekly basis, we'll see what transpires from there. But I think the point is, I would have thought that Oregon's offensive line would have been, a really good test for Ohio State as well. I'm not sure that that's going to be quite the case, at least compared to what they just faced against Minnesota.
Yeah, you're tentative to really say some things, but I agree with you. Just basically, I watched almost all of the Oregon Fresno State game, and maybe, as the old saying goes, you get the biggest jump is from week 1 to week 2, and I think Oregon needs to get that on both sides of the ball, to be honest with you. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah. Oh man, what a shame to see Ibrahim go out of that game the way he did and lose his season probably. I mean, it's just I never like to see that with anybody, especially the elite players who are really, this whole name, image, and likeness, this whole reason why you think players should be paid. It really goes to those star guys who really bring your eyeballs to a game or bring your feet to a game, to sit in the stands to watch. And it's really a shame to see. And plus Minnesota, as I've pointed out to people since that game, the beauty, if that's what you want to call it, of Ohio State football right now and Alabama football is you lose a player like that, you have another guy coming along who can plug in, is probably almost as good, if not as good, and the bus keeps rolling unless you go 3 or 4 deep. And that's why it's a shame. With that said, before we get into some of the things I didn't like that Ohio State definitely needs to improve, my goodness, my man, Mayan Williams, as you and I both agreed. I mean, I thought they would go with Master Teague the third only because of the hierarchy, the senior, the deserving, the coming back guy as a starter. But Mayan Williams was number one when we saw them in preseason camp that first time when they ran out there, and he was number one as at the running back when they started the game, and boom, he showed why he's number one. I'm not sure anybody thought he was number one because he was a great sprinter, but what a run, right? To just cement the fact of the confidence that Tony Alford and Ryan Day have in this young man.
Yeah, incredible speed. Somebody asked me about that a week or two ago. I don't know about Mayan Williams as the top back because he doesn't have that acceleration
speed. Yeah,
I'm not sure. Did you not see those runs against Northwestern and Clemson? Like, they weren't huge home runs. They didn't take him the distance, but man, a guy who can see a hole, hit it, and not look back. He's got plenty of speed to pull away from guys, as you showed on that rush. He was a little bit funny talking about it after the game, Tim, where he's saying, well, I think I went the wrong way. And I think people misinterpreted it a little bit. Like, that play wasn't designed to go left.
Yes, right. Correct.
He could have cut it inside. We saw J.K. Dobbins make that play 1,000 times in his career, but he had an opening to the outside. There were no defenders there. He saw green grass and he took it and exploded and didn't look back. So that's the part, that you go through a training camp and all that. So you don't know.
Yeah.
Are you going to make those plays when it's live and when it counts? Mayan Williams had to do that. Now, I think what you're building up to here, Tim, is that then he didn't get another carry until late in the first half. And Ohio State had a script, and I don't think it wanted to move off of it when it really should have after the time of possession got weird and wonky. I think we've seen enough from Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson after just one game to know that they're different than Master Teague. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
Ohio State's rushing attack needs to rely on those two guys and probably those two guys alone.
Yeah. And the truth in advertising, we've been saying that all along. They are not, Master Teague is not the same kind of back as Travion Henderson. Right. And as we know now, as Mayan Williams. I think I've told people, we had you, I was on guest host with Bo Bishop on Friday morning, and we talked about this. I think may have been while you were on. We had you on as a guest, and I was a guest host having you on as a guest. Wrap your head around that. But the bottom line is sometimes as coaches, et cetera, you want everybody to see the reality, and then there's no questions, inside the locker room, outside the locker room, outside the premises. And I think everybody saw, number one, why Mayan Williams is held in such high esteem by Tony Alford and by Travion Henderson. Even my wife said that was just breathtaking, the way he caught that little swing, got a block from Ruckert and just exploded. Those are things you kind of can't coach. That acceleration to daylight, and not that they were either one of those guys are the two fastest guys on the team, but just that acceleration, that instant burst you get that sets guys apart. And I agree with you there. Speaking of knee-jerk reactions and stuff, how about the hue and cry from the social media realm after C.J. Stroud's first half as a starting quarterback? Get Cal McCord in there. Get Cal McCord in there. Ladies and gentlemen, please show some patience. I think when a guy goes 5 out of 8 for 230 yards and 4 touchdowns in the second half passing, I think he proved he was a quick learner, got his feet under him, and had one of the great halves, maybe the greatest single half of a starting quarterback, first-time starting quarterback in Ohio State history. What do you think?
I don't know how many times Ryan Day needed to say that quarterbacks have to learn through failure, setbacks, difficulty, adversity. He's been saying it for 3 years, but he said it specifically with a first-time starter just about every single day that he's talked, dating back to March for this season. There were always going to be growing pains. Ohio State was always going to be patient working through them. And I guess I'm not surprised, because it's still, when you're a passionate fan and you want things to go smoothly right away, that you would make that, you'd be frustrated. I guess Ohio State was frustrated too, but they weren't going to abandon all this time and effort that's been invested in CJ Stroud when you know what the upside can be. And he deserves a ton of credit. I said it over and over to you when you were talking about the radio last week, in the rain, on the road, against a Big Ten opponent in your first start. Those are 4 difficult things, and it wouldn't have been any easier for Kyle McCord or Jack Miller, especially since they haven't been taking the first team reps. CJ Stroud is a damn good quarterback. The second half showed it. Now you get to get better because you're not going to have first game nerves anymore. Probably going to be nice and dry on Saturday. Not every game is going to be perfect weather conditions, but everybody has to go through that for the first time. And Ohio State found things that worked. Yeah, throwing a screen out to Travion Henderson and let him go 70 yards is easier. But guess what? Garrett Wilson is going to be open in every other game for the rest of the year. That's still a good deep ball in stride for a touchdown. Chris Olave is still going to run really good routes and make plays after the catch. Okay, that's great. CJ Stroud doesn't have to have 0 yards after catch for the rest of the year. That's not how Ohio State's offense is built. He did the things that Ohio State needed him to do. And I think it was tough. Quincy Avery, one of the quarterback gurus who works with CJ Stroud, made this point as well. It's really hard. If that's your first start and all those other factors that I mentioned, and you start poorly, to have the mental strength to respond to that and play really well after, to bounce back and handle that well and compartmentalize. That was the most, I think Ryan Day will leave that game saying that's what matters more than anything else. He already knew they had physical skills to play the position.
Yeah.
But now he mentally responded to a situation that wasn't ideal.
You know what it reminded me of? Because I tweeted at halftime, I said they need to get the running game, get back to the running game, get it going, because they had some pretty good success with that off and on in the first half, and get Chris Olave involved. I felt like a genius after that first drive after the second half. But it reminded me of like a guy getting a new sports car. I'm talking about CJ Stroud. And he's driving, and first you get on the gas a little bit too hard. Sometimes you can spin out. A lot of guys crash their sports cars leaving the lot, driving them home for the first time. But then you figure out what all the buttons, hey, let's turn this to sport. What does sport meaning? Chris Olave, throw the ball to that guy, and Garrett Wilson. Let them do the dirty work. Give the ball to Travion Henderson. Give the ball to Mayan Williams. Let them do the dirty work. You saw him learning how to drive that car as the game went on, and it was. Second half was an impressive performance by an offense that looked at times lost and a little bit, not inept is not the right word, but struggling to figure out what it was all about. And like you said, there was no doubt that Ryan Day and his coaches were trying different things, different personnel, just to see what worked on that car. I think they figured it out in the second half. And if anybody watched that Oregon Fresno State game, if you can give CJ Stroud some time on Saturday against Oregon, there are going to be opportunities in the passing game. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think that will be the case for Ohio State, no matter who they play. We already have talked about this over and over, and Tim, you wrote about it again last week, that this Ohio State offense is just generationally talented and gifted and could do whatever it wanted. Yeah. I think there was probably an element for an opener, at least when it comes especially to guys who may have been hurt, to hold them out. Cam Brown, Seven Banks coming to mind there, that Ohio State knew at some point it would be able to exert its will offensively and do whatever it wanted, which it did. And I think that will continue to be the case, because that offensive line is incredibly talented. That was without Harry Miller in the opener and Luke Whippler going out there. Another guy, maybe we haven't talked about it as much as we should, but a first start on the road in the rain for a center is no cakewalk either. Those 4 guys with him, DeJuan Jones was a monster. Paris Johnson was destroying people with pancakes, taking them all the way to the sideline a couple times. It looked like his high school film, to be honest with you, the way that he was driving people out there. You know what you're going to get from Thayer Munford and Nicholas Petit-Frere, man. I'm not even talking about the skill players. The offensive line is so good, it's going to keep C.J. Stroud in positions to succeed all year, I think.
Yeah, a lot of people thought they were teasing about that when we first saw that lineup, that offensive line. But every time we got to watch a little bit of practice, same group was out there, and then boom, let's face it, there was a battle between Harry Miller and Luke Whippler for that starting job at center in the preseason anyway. I mean, they really like Luke Whippler, and with the exception of a couple of snaps that went off his inside leg, you're doing a lot of things there at center. Number one, you're trying to get a perfect little pistol shotgun type snap back, but also you got to reach over here for a guy that's in the gap. Things like that. A lot of things went on. We all remember Harry Miller was at Michigan State when Justin Fields showed his shortstop capabilities by saving a lot of plays in that game. That should have gotten him Heisman Trophy recognition, just the way he saved that game from some bad snaps and things. But I digress. I'm reaching way too far back in the past. But you're right. Let's get to the meat and potatoes, though. That a lot of people left there with questions, and I think they're legitimate questions defensively. It's funny. You watch Denzel Burke play. Start at one corner. He got better as the game went on in terms of confidence and stuff. We all know sometimes it takes a full year for a guy to feel that confidence at cornerback, no matter how gifted they are. Saw Ryan Watts have a few problems, but he got better, maybe a little over aggressive at times. But starting for Cam Brown and Sevyn Banks, wouldn't be surprised to see those guys be the same two starting corners this week, except now they have a full game under them. Denzel Burke, you can see the potential right in that young man.
Yeah, Burke was going like this throughout that game. You could tell guy had a great camp. He wasn't even the highest profile of these DBs, corners that Ohio State's recruited recently, but he's certainly had some of the most positive things said about him. Got that black stripe off pretty quickly, and that's a hard ask to go out there and be perfect for a full game for any cornerback, no matter how good they are, but especially when you're making your starting debut as a true freshman. That was pretty flashy what he did. Ryan Watts, I think it was up and down. You could see a little bit more comfort as that went along. I expected a little bit more from him. I thought for a first choice lineup that Ryan Watts would be the third cornerback, the guy off the bench to help Cam Brown and Sevyn Banks. That may not be the case anymore after what Denzel Burke has showed. I'll take an opportunity here to say DeMario McCall handled himself much better than I would have imagined.
Yes.
Not great by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly effective when out there, and makes you wonder if that just should have been a move a long time in the making. There's nothing you can do about it now, but pressing him into action the way that he was in that game, he deserves credit for what he's done. I'm not really that concerned about the secondary for Ohio State. I think once you add those two starting cornerbacks back in there, that's the crazy part, is that Kerry Combs now going into this is his second year. It's just 1 week, but he's still not ever had one time where he could just say, these are the starting cornerbacks, these are the starting safeties, here's the secondary, we're going to go do it. He still had, even to start this year, still had to go piece some things together with a couple first-time starters. The other part that'll be important this week is Josh Proctor's shoulder. I believe that there's not going to be any sort of long-term issue there for him. I'm told that it's just a little bit of soreness, and they think that he and Brown and Banks should be available on Saturday. We'll have to wait to know for sure as the week progresses and the doctors and trainers get to look at that. But I think that all three should be close or ready by Saturday.
You know who else I liked in that game? He started, but I really liked the way he played, was Ronnie Hickman. Number 15. That young man, and you could see him getting better as the game went on, more confident, more, stick his nose in there, kind of like, the kind of guy you want, I think, at that spot. And we'll see where that thing goes. What bothered me, awesome, was a couple of 3 plays where they clearly did not line up correctly. Totally, basically unsound. In fact, on one of them was, I think, ended up being a Minnesota touchdown over the right side, where you had a couple of defensive linemen there, but no linebackers. every linebacker appeared to be left of center on that play. And we'll be asking more about that. I'm only bringing that up because what bothered me was not that they lined up like that, but that a timeout was not called before the snap. Some frantic coach running to the head linesman going, it didn't happen. And that bothered me more than the fact that that they ended up running the play and it was a touchdown, because when you see that from the press box, you got to let somebody know. I think you could have seen that from the sidelines, but that was first game situations with new players, with linebackers who are trained at every position. If you follow my drift, but sometimes maybe they forget, hey, I'm the Will on this one, or I'm the Sam on this one, and that's what it looked like, because there's no way you have a defense designed like that lets a guy run 30 yards before he gets hit. But I digress. Were there any other troubling parts about that? Am I off my rocker there a little bit? Those are things you got to get fixed as the season goes on, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to Ohio State playing too much depth or doing too much experimenting, or however you want to look at it. I think they played too many people, and that made it difficult for them to find that rhythm and that consistency. Maybe what you're talking about there with the cross-training and the amount of substitutions that Ohio State was using in that game is too much confusion. And one thing that we'd heard about having Al Washington, or when Jeff Hafley came, or Kerry Combs with what he wanted to do with even a more diverse playbook, but still making it simple and to understand. Yeah. Life is about this, but certainly football is, with reps. And the more you do anything, the more comfortable you're going to be with all the responsibilities and everything that goes into playing a position or doing any kind of job. So I think Ohio State is going to have to trust the guys that it picks to be their starters, which they're doing that for good reason. The game ready stuff is great, and developing for the future is also important. I get all of that. But if you're going to win at the highest level, then your best players are going to have to be your most consistent, most reliable, and play the most. You're picking them for a reason to take the first snap. Maybe you should let them take the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th as well, until a game is in hand. So I think that Taraja Mitchell is one of them. I suspect that Cody Simon is going to play himself into one of those roles. Tommy Eichenberg, I think he played a solid game, missed a couple tackles, maybe missed a couple assignments. You can chalk that up as well to a first time doing it. I think he's going to be part of that. Dallas Gant, I don't know if injuries concerned are still a part of that. That he was a little bit up and down, inconsistent for me in that game. I don't know how. It doesn't even matter who they pick. It's not up to me. But Al Washington, Kerry Combs, they need to determine who they think are the best, and then just let them go do it and get comfortable out on the field.
Yeah, bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, I know you know this, but I'll talk about the obvious anyway. The interesting thing about college football is that first game is a combination of a game that counts on your ledger and also a preseason game where you're trying to find out whether some people are big time ready. The NFL has 3 preseason games now. It used to have 4. Hell, back in the day, you used to have 6. Are you kidding me? 6. Can you imagine that? Awesome.
No, I can't.
Going into a 14 or 12 or 14 game season, that was nuts. But should have had the best on the field by that point, right? But the bottom line is, and what Awesome was talking about there was the fact that you try to combine a lot of things into that first game. You want to see who can play, who responds to adversity, and everything else. The funny thing about it is, Awesome, it was, in retrospect, I think Ohio State had almost a perfect first game in that regard of getting a ton of people on the field. Maybe too many, as you pointed out, because let a guy take a deep breath and play a few possessions, right? And find out whether it was hyperventilation that caused him to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you're right. But that's that little game that coaches have to play. And I think Ohio State, Brian Day and these coaches know so much more about this team than they did a week ago. Agreed?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I just think, look, Day has said this, and I know that he's aware of it. They broke this into basically a 2-game phase, 2-game season, start with Minnesota and Oregon. So they knew they were going to be tough tests. They weren't Tulsa and Akron or any other tune-up games that they got to work through things. That's why it's just surprised me that they did as much substituting early in that first half as they did, because Minnesota was capable of making that a game. They did. They led twice, as you said, and forced Ohio State to come from behind. Now, the talent advantage when Ohio State is rolling it was hugely significant, and I think they knew they could pull away at any point. So maybe that fueled that a little bit. All right, we have to experiment because Oregon is going to be better than Minnesota. And you can argue with that and quibble with that. They didn't wind up hurting them on Thursday night. So it's a little bit of the best of all worlds for a coaching staff where they found out that information. All those people that missed the reps from last year because of the COVID situations and practices and all that we've talked about, they got that. They got good evaluation, good reps, experiment, and experience to go into this Oregon game. Plus, the regulars also had some things that they didn't do as well as they would have wanted to. So you have teaching points and a 14-point win. Like, really, a coach would take all of that every single time, I think, from an opener.
Yeah. I had a guy make an observation to me, too, though, before we leave and before we give our last little thoughts about the Ohio State-Oregon game, the matchup. Maybe Denzel Burke maybe he should be considered among the three, but maybe there's more competition at those starting quarterback spots than we gave it credit for. I mean, just in a brief nutshell answer, give me an answer, give me an observation on that. I think I might agree with that.
I think that you'd put him ahead of Ryan Watts at this point. What I saw from a healthy pitch count Cam Brown and some of those glimpses we had, he looked like an elite cornerback to me. I just think back to that, whenever that was, week 2, and they had the throwing sessions and Cam Brown back-to-back plays, back-to-back passes broken up, one on Julian Fleming, one coming across the middle to bat away, a ball away from Marvin Harrison. Those are burned into my mind.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's uncertainty with those top two, but Kerry Combs, before he left for Tennessee, used to get on us all the time and say, why are you not calling Denzel Ward a starter? We have 3 starters here.
Yeah.
That's how we view it. So in that regard, I think you can say that Denzel Burke is probably in position to be an Ohio State starting cornerback. I think in terms of reps, he would be 3rd, but you just don't know because Ohio State had enough concern to make sure that Cam Brown was healthy for Oregon that they didn't even let him travel. And there was enough concern with Sevyn Banks as he recovers from his own injury that he was suited up but didn't play a snap. So, it's not 100%. And over the course of a year, you're going to have injuries anyway. I guess the point is Denzel Burke is going to play a meaningful role against Oregon one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, I'm still in a quandary why I'm scratching my head as I do this often. Why Sevyn Banks wasn't listed as a game time decision, because clearly, in my opinion, he was, or they already knew he wasn't going to play, but he was on the trip. You follow my drift there?
Yeah.
I mean,
especially if you're waiting now until 3 hours before kickoff. Right.
Available or unavailable, that seems pretty clear cut to me, Depends on what your definition of is. Real quick, Clemson, Georgia. If you like defense, ridiculous game. Suddenly Clemson's clawing its way back. As Dabo Swinney said after the game, all of our goals are still ahead of us. Yeah, if some other guys get beat, that's what I said about it. Because you don't have the schedule to back up anything now, except that you can win the ACC. Georgia, what a win! The only touchdown in that game with 2 highly touted quarterbacks. The only touchdown in that game was a pick 6 by Georgia, which you leave with questions about them, about their offense to a certain extent. But that's what you get in openers like that. But what was the most surprising development from the weekend of all of the AYOs from your perspective? Yeah,
I think that Clemson just completely disintegrating on the offensive line. I don't really have an explanation for it, because when we have these conversations about Ohio State's recruiting level, it is Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson, Georgia at the top of that list. Like Georgia showed that, other than maybe some issues at wide receiver, lack lack of imagination is not a new thing for Georgia offensively. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider that a surprise. But Clemson's inability to run the football at all against, like Georgia has good personnel. That's great. Clemson is supposed to be a national title contender, and you rush for 2 yards. I don't get it. We saw what Ohio State did up front against them in the Sugar Bowl. They absolutely manhandled those guys, and that was with Jackson Carman out there for Clemson. They don't have that. They lost a second-round draft pick at left tackle.
Right.
I don't know what they're going to do to protect him.
Yeah, Etienne's Travis Etienne's gone. I mean,
You would have thought the way that they've recruited that they would have capable linemen or someone who could run the football for them to replace Travis Etienne, and there were no signs of that. And now look, they're going to steamroll basically everybody else on their schedule in the ACC. That league is not anywhere near good enough to compete man for man with that roster. But I don't know enough specifics about when it might happen. I'll just give Spencer credit for this. When we left last week, he said he thought Georgia would beat Clemson and that Clemson would lose to NC State by the end of the month and have 2 losses. And I kind of thought that sounded a little far-fetched, but he may have been onto something there because that Clemson team has problems, and I'm not sure that just playing ACC teams will solve them.
Yeah, you thought Glue Man Spencer was had too much of anticipation getting to the brew pub on his mind.
Right.
I mean, yeah. Then you look at North Carolina. Their other gleaming beacon there, and what happened to them at Virginia Tech. I mean, and then you look at the Florida State Notre Dame game. Florida State showed so much game, pardon the pun, in that game, coming back, but then ultimately losing it. But I'm not sure about the ACC at this point. This is a knee-jerk reaction, obviously, to it. But look at as Jared Denney and I talked about, look at the Pac-12 North. Oh my goodness, Washington loses to Montana. It may lose to another team that starts with them this week. That'll really show them where their program is. Yeah. But no, I'm just joking. But
both of those programs really need that win. That.
Yeah, I'm just joking, sort of. But the only team from the Pac-12 North that won a game was Oregon, and it struggled against Fresno State, which is coming in. But yeah, right on down the line there, all these. And meanwhile, Alabama kept on rolling. I mean, that was a clinic in how to start a season. Agreed.
They seem to have one of those ready every single year. I would never want to sign up for an opener against Nick Saban.
You agreed with me, right? They're always playing these teams. It seems like with a name. I don't know why I got so excited there suddenly, but I was telling a buddy of mine that they're with a name that may be just a year away from living up to that name again, like USC a few years ago. And I mean, that I don't know if they're geniuses at doing that, or if that's just the way it happens. But Alabama, Miami looked pretty good on paper, but no, it was not pretty good. Agreed?
Yeah, and I think that there's a part of the broadcast plan, voters wanting week 1 to be important. Hey, national writers say, hey, make sure you send me to this game. It's Alabama, Miami. It's huge. I got to be there. Let's pump up this team and give them a ranking that maybe they don't deserve. I'm not going to go too far into the conspiracy theories. That's not my normal lane. But I do think there's a little something to that. And you're like, wow, oh, okay, well, if they beat Alabama in week 1, Miami would be a top 10 team for sure, or top 5 team. Let's just hedge the bet a little bit and put them there just in case. And if they lose, hey, no problem, because we're just going to say that Alabama's the best team in the country anyway.
Okay, let's get done with this with this last topic. With that in mind, how big of a game is this Saturday, Ohio State versus Oregon? Does it fall more into what we were just talking about, or do you feel Oregon is I think Oregon's, don't get me wrong, I think they're a legit opponent, legit contender in the Pac-12, but is Oregon, do you think, as good as the name would say?
I don't. And I think that this game is bigger for Oregon and bigger for the Pac-12 than it is for Ohio State. I'm not suggesting that Ohio State would accept a loss or that it meets the standard, but I think that we've seen this before with a week 2 team with a new quarterback and retooling things, that you have time to bounce back for that. Now, Clemson will have that same opportunity as well. But I don't think that Clemson's schedule matches up with what Ohio State still has ahead of it. This is not, setting up an excuse or anything like that. Ohio State is the better team. They're playing at home. The Horseshoe is going to be full for the first time in 2 years. This is a game that they should win. I think that they should win it pretty comfortably as well. But in terms of the national landscape, I don't believe it will be as important for the Buckeyes as it is for Oregon. And we can effectively, because of what you just talked about in week 1 for the Pac-12 and the other losses that they suffered across the board, you're in this situation already where you can just rule out the entire conference if Ohio State handles its business the way that it might at noon on Saturday in the Shield.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that was me playing the role of lawyer, asking a question of the witness that I knew the answer to. Just wanted to hear it put into the public purview. With that said, the stenographer says she's run out of paper. Court stenographer, awesome. So, until next week. And by the way, enjoy this Ohio State-Oregon game. It's going to be interesting no matter how it goes down. Most of all, is Ohio State defense going to come to play for 60 minutes and get after these guys. But until we start to do the autopsy on that game and look forward to these kind of a slide into what should be preseason games, this is Tim May for Awesome Ward and the Tim May Podcast. We'll see you next week.